I woke up expecting another quiet Saturday, the kind that starts with strong coffee, a slow walk along the south fence, and the familiar sound of my black Angus bulls complaining about the summer heat before settling down to graze. Out where I live, mornings usually belong to the birds, the wind, and whatever thoughts you've been avoiding all week. Instead, I opened my front door and honestly wondered if I'd walked into the wrong life, because spread across nearly 80 acres of my pasture sat what looked like a full-blown music festival. There were hundreds of tents in every color imaginable, RVs lined up bumper to bumper, food trucks smoking away like it was county fair season, portable stages blasting country music, kids racing around on electric bikes, campfires already burning despite the dry weather, and people laughing like they'd discovered some hidden paradise. For a second, I honestly thought maybe I'd had a stroke, because nothing about what I was seeing made any sense. Then I spotted the one person capable of turning confusion into certainty. Standing on top of a folding table with a bright blue megaphone was a woman named Vanessa Holloway, president of the Silver Creek Meadows Homeowners Association, waving both arms over her head like she was hosting the Super Bowl halftime show. "Welcome to Freedom Weekend," she shouted. "This land belongs to the community now." That sentence told me everything I needed to know. I didn't yell. I didn't run across the field. I didn't call anybody. I just stood there holding my coffee, watching pickup trucks roll over fences my grandfather built by hand almost 60 years ago, watching strangers drive tent stakes into grazing land that had been in my family since before the interstate even existed. And I smiled, because people like Vanessa always make the same mistake. They think confidence is stronger than documentation. My name is Ethan Mercer, and I've lived on that ranch in western Colorado my entire life. My father used to tell me that land isn't really something you own. It's something you're borrowing from the next generation, and every decision you make either leaves it stronger or weaker for whoever comes after you. Maybe that's why I never sold when developers came knocking with checks that would have made most folks retire overnight. That ranch carried too many memories. My parents were buried on a ridge overlooking the north pasture. My daughter learned to ride horses there. My wife Emma planted cottonwoods along the creek before cancer took her 7 years earlier. Every fence post, every weathered barn board, every scar in those fields meant something to me. Vanessa never understood any of that because she'd only lived in the subdivision across the county road for 3 years. Silver Creek Meadows was one of those neighborhoods built during the housing boom, all matching mailboxes, decorative stone entrances, and rules about grass height that somehow mattered more than being decent neighbors. At first, we got along just fine. People waved when they drove by. Kids stopped to pet the horses through the fence. I'd even led a local scout troop camp on one corner of the ranch every spring after they asked permission. Then Vanessa got elected HOA president. Suddenly, everything became a battle. She complained that my cattle smelled too close to property lines. She wanted me to replace my old red barn because it lowered surrounding home values. She sent violation letters because my tractors were visible from the subdivision entrance. One meeting, she actually suggested that since my ranch was mostly empty space, I should dedicate walking trails for neighborhood residents. I politely declined every single request. That seemed to bother her more than if I'd yelled. Some people don't know what to do with calm. About 2 months before that Saturday morning, she cornered me after a county zoning meeting and smiled that practiced smile politicians use right before saying something insulting. "You're sitting on a lot of unused land, Ethan," she said. "Communities evolve. Maybe it's time you stopped thinking like it's still 1955. I laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. "The cows still seem pretty attached to 1955, I answered. She didn't laugh. Looking back, that was probably the moment she decided I needed to be taught a lesson. Over the following weeks, I noticed little things. Survey ribbons disappeared. Fence gates were left open. Tire tracks crossed one corner of my pasture. A few residents wandered farther onto my property than they should have, always apologizing when I asked them to leave, saying they'd been told it was common land. I figured rumors were spreading, but I underestimated how far Vanessa was willing to take them. What I didn't know was that she'd been advertising something called the Freedom Weekend Community Campout across neighborhood Facebook groups, selling campsite reservations, promising live music, food vendors, family activities, and exclusive access to open community ranch land. People actually paid for tickets. Vendors paid booth fees. Local bands signed contracts. She collected thousands of dollars by convincing everyone the ranch had somehow become shared recreational space after an imaginary county agreement. None of it was true. As I watched another camper pull through my crushed fence that morning, I finally noticed something else. My security cameras had been spray painted. Someone had cut the chain on the south entrance during the night. That wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. That was trespassing with planning behind it. Still, I never reached for my phone to call the sheriff. Instead, I walked back inside, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, grabbed my drone case, my survey maps, and a weathered binder my father used to call the receipt book, then looked out the kitchen window one more time at nearly 500 strangers celebrating on land they believed belonged to them. They had absolutely no idea they had just stepped into the worst weekend of Vanessa Holloway's entire life. I launched the drone before I made a single phone call because experience had taught me that memories change, stories evolve, and people who know they're in trouble suddenly become very creative. But high-resolution video recorded at 7:30 in the morning has a funny way of staying honest forever. As the drone climbed over the pasture, my tablet filled with images that honestly looked unbelievable even though I was watching them live. Pickup trucks had parked directly across irrigation lines. Campfires burned less than 20 feet from dry grass that hadn't seen rain in almost 3 weeks. Someone had driven an ATV through my western hayfield, leaving fresh ruts across crops that were supposed to be harvested in another month. Kids were chasing my cattle for fun while parents stood nearby recording videos and laughing. Near the creek, 3 RVs had already started draining gray water onto protected grazing land. Every few seconds, I tagged another image with GPS coordinates and a timestamp. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger clouds, judgment. What I felt instead was something much colder. I was building a timeline. Around 8 o'clock, my foreman, Walt Granger, pulled into the driveway, took one look across the pasture, and slowly removed his sunglasses. "Ethan," he said quietly, "tell me we're looking at some movie production that rented the place." I handed him the drone controller without answering. He watched the screen for about 30 seconds before letting out a low whistle. "Well," he muttered, "that's about 300 different insurance claims walking around out there." "Closer to 500, I replied, "and they're just getting started." Walt looked at me, expecting I'd already called the sheriff. When I told him I hadn't, he frowned. "Why wait?" "Because the sheriff could remove people." He couldn't explain why they got there. He couldn't document environmental violations, agricultural damage, fire hazards, commercial fraud, or illegal event operations. If Vanessa wanted to turn my ranch into a business without permission, then every agency with jurisdiction deserved the chance to see it exactly as she created it. My first call went to the county agricultural office. The second went to the fire marshal. The third went to the environmental compliance division. The fourth went to my insurance adjuster. Only after those calls did I leave a message for Sheriff Daniel Brooks, and even then I simply said, "I have a large trespassing situation that's likely going to need deputies once the inspectors arrive." His response surprised me. "Don't touch anything," he said. "We'll meet you there." About 30 minutes later, while officials were still on their way, I decided it was finally time to introduce myself to my unexpected guests. I climbed into my old ranch truck, drove slowly across the pasture, and parked beside Vanessa's temporary stage. Music was blasting. Somebody was flipping pancakes on a giant flat-top grill. Kids were lined up for face painting. Vendors were selling handmade candles and barbecue sandwiches as if this were the county fair. The moment Vanessa spotted me, she grabbed her megaphone with a smile so confident it bordered on theatrical. "Everyone," she announced, "our neighbor Ethan has decided to join the celebration." A few people applauded politely. Most had no idea who I was. I climbed out of my truck and walked toward the stage. "Morning, Vanessa." "Beautiful turnout, isn't it?" she said proudly. "Looks expensive," I answered. She laughed. "Community investments usually are." I looked around for a moment before asking a very simple question. "Did anyone here actually see permission to use this land?" She rolled her eyes dramatically. "The county supports shared recreational access." "Really?" I asked. "Do you have that agreement?" "Our legal committee reviewed everything." "That's not what I asked." Her smile tightened. "You don't own every inch of Colorado." "Ethan." "No," I replied calmly, "just this part." A few people nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Vanessa noticed it too. "Don't listen to him," she announced through the megaphone. "He's been trying to intimidate this community for years." I almost laughed because intimidation usually involves threats, and I'd barely spoken 20 words. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I'm just making sure everyone understands exactly where they're standing." She folded her arms. "We're standing on community property." I nodded once. Okay, then I turned around, climbed back into my truck, and drove away. Behind me I heard scattered laughter. Someone yelled, "Guess he gave up." Another shouted, "Light another bonfire." I couldn't have scripted it better myself. 10 minutes later, the first county vehicle rolled through the broken south fence, then another, then another. White trucks with official seals from departments that almost nobody thinks about until they're standing in your driveway. The fire marshal arrived first. Deputy Fire Marshal Linda Ortiz stepped out, looked across the pasture, and didn't even bother introducing herself before asking, "Who authorized open flames under today's burn advisory?" Nobody answered. She walked directly toward the nearest bonfire, took one look at the dry grass surrounding it, and immediately ordered it extinguished. While campers argued with her, two agriculture inspectors began photographing damaged fencing, stressed cattle, and crushed grazing areas. They weren't interested in ownership disputes. They were calculating financial losses. Meanwhile, the environmental team headed straight toward the creek where my drone had spotted wastewater. Within minutes, one inspector held up a sample bottle and quietly said to his partner, "We've got contamination." That was the first moment I saw uncertainty creep across Vanessa's face. She hurried over with two A2A board members following behind her. "Excuse me," she demanded. "Who called all these people?" Deputy Ortiz looked up from her clipboard. "Was it you?" Vanessa ignored the question. "This is a private HOA event." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Exactly." Vanessa blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means whoever organized it is responsible for every safety violation occurring on this site." The color drained from Vanessa's face just enough for me to notice. She recovered quickly. "Well, this isn't my property." Deputy Ortiz smiled politely. "Then why are you listed as event organizer on these vendor permits?" Vanessa froze. One of the food truck owners, trying to help, stepped forward, holding a packet of paperwork. She signed all our agreements. He handed them directly to the deputy. I watched Vanessa realize, in real time, that every signature she proudly placed on contracts over the past month had just become evidence. It only got worse. Sheriff Brooks finally arrived with 4 deputies. Unlike television, they didn't rush in with sirens. They simply parked, observed, and started talking to people one at a time. Calm officers asking calm questions usually scare guilty people far more than shouting ever does. "Who invited you? How much did you pay? Did anyone verify ownership?" The answers were remarkably consistent. Everyone pointed toward Vanessa. Everyone described advertisements promising legal access. Everyone believed the event had county approval because that's what they'd been told. None of them had intended to trespass. They'd been sold a story. About an hour later, County Surveyor Melissa Crane arrived carrying a weathered metal case containing official plats dating back decades. She met me beside the old oak tree where my grandfather once taught me how to read property markers. "Morning, Ethan," she said. "I figured I'd be seeing you under better circumstances." "I appreciate you coming," she smiled. I brought receipts. Together we walked toward the center of the campground where Vanessa was now arguing with deputies, inspectors, and increasingly frustrated campers demanding refunds. Melissa unfolded a large survey map across the hood of her truck while dozens of curious people gathered around. Then she pointed to one bright red line running across the page. "Everything west of County Road 18 belongs to the Mercer Ranch Trust," she explained loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. She traced the property boundaries with one finger. Every campsite, every vendor, every stage, every RV parked here today. She looked directly at Vanessa before finishing the sentence. "Not 1 square foot of this event is located on HOA property." Silence spread through that crowd faster than the music ever had. You could almost hear 500 people processing the exact same thought at exactly the same moment. Then someone near the back asked the question that changed the entire atmosphere. "Wait, if this isn't community land, then what exactly did we all pay for?" The answer to that question was about to destroy far more than a weekend camping trip. Nobody spoke for what felt like an entire minute. The music had already been shut off by the fire marshal. The food trucks had stopped serving because deputies asked everyone to stay where they were. And 500 people who had shown up expecting a fun weekend were suddenly staring at Vanessa like she'd just admitted the whole thing had been a magic trick. She opened her mouth several times before any words came out. "There has to be some mistake," she finally said, forcing out a nervous laugh. "Our legal committee assured us." County Surveyor Melissa Crane gently folded the map closed before interrupting her. "Property boundaries aren't decided by committees, Ms. Holloway. They're decided by deeds." That single sentence landed harder than anyone yelling ever could have. Then the questions started coming from every direction. You charged us $200 a campsite. You told us the county approved this. Who's paying if our RV gets towed? What about the vendor fees? Vanessa kept trying to regain control, insisting everything would be sorted out, but every explanation only made things worse. One of the food truck owners stepped forward holding his contract. "You signed this yourself," he said. "It literally says you guarantee lawful access to the event site." Another vendor added, "I drove 4 hours to be here." A family from Denver asked who would reimburse their vacation expenses. The crowd that had cheered for her that morning was now surrounding her for very different reasons. Sheriff Brooks finally raised his voice just enough to restore order. "Folks, listen carefully. As far as we're concerned, most of you are victims of misinformation. We need everyone to leave the property in an organized manner. Anyone refusing to leave after being notified will be trespassing. But right now, our priority is getting everybody out safely." Relief washed over hundreds of faces. Most people packed up immediately. A surprising number stopped by my truck on their way out to apologize. One older couple even shook my hand. "We honestly believed this was public land," the husband admitted. "If we'd known," I smiled and told him, "you weren't the problem." Because they weren't. Bad information spreads fast when it's wrapped in confidence. By late afternoon, the pasture looked almost empty again, except for tire ruts, flattened grass, broken fence posts, scattered trash, and the ugly reminder of what arrogance can do in just a few hours. My insurance adjuster walked the property beside the agriculture inspectors while they measured damaged fencing, estimated lost grazing value, documented stress to my cattle, and calculated restoration costs. The environmental team ordered contaminated soil removed near the creek. The fire marshal issued citations for multiple burn violations. Every agency had its own report, its own evidence, and its own consequences. None of them depended on me being angry. They depended on facts. About a week later, my attorney called with a stack of documents that almost covered his desk. Between property damage, cleanup costs, destroyed fencing, agricultural losses, environmental remediation, commercial misrepresentation, and several civil claims filed by campers and vendors seeking refunds, the financial exposure facing the HOA and Vanessa personally had climbed into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Their insurance carrier refused coverage after determining the event had been organized outside the association's legal authority and based on false representations. The HOA board held an emergency meeting 3 days later. Residents who had defended Vanessa for months suddenly wanted answers about missing money, unauthorized contracts, and why no one had ever verified ownership before selling tickets. By the end of that meeting, she was removed as HOA president by a vote that wasn't even close. I never attended. I heard about it later from Walt, who laughed before saying, "Turns out people really hate paying for someone else's ego." Maybe they do. A month after everything happened, I finished repairing the last section of fence with my daughter, Claire. We watched the cattle wander back into the restored pasture like nothing had ever happened. Animals are good that way. They don't waste energy holding grudges. They simply return to where they belong once the noise disappears. As the sun dropped behind the mountains, Claire looked across the field and asked, "Dad, were you ever scared that morning?" I thought about it for a second before answering honestly. "No, I was disappointed." "There's a difference," she nodded, even if I wasn't sure she completely understood yet. Maybe one day she will, because the biggest lesson from that weekend wasn't that the law eventually worked or that paperwork beat loud voices. It was something my father tried to teach me years ago while we were repairing fences together. He said, "Son, never confuse permission with assumption. One is given, the other is stolen." I've carried that sentence with me ever since, and after everything that happened, I doubt I'll ever forget it. So now, I'd like to hear what you think. If you had been one of those campers, would you have blamed the HOA president? Or should people have verified the truth before paying to attend? And if you had been standing in my boots that morning, would you have called the sheriff immediately? Or would you have stayed patient and let every agency see the situation exactly as it was? Let me know your thoughts in the comments because stories like this always spark strong opinions. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more real-world property disputes and small-town justice stories, and share this with someone who believes confidence matters more than facts. Sometimes the loudest person in the room isn't the one holding the strongest position. Sometimes the quiet one is simply holding the deed.